Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Olivia from DIA. You around there, Graham? I'm joined by Graham O'Brien from the DVSA.
Hi, Olivia.
Hello. So that's brilliant. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this webinar on this lovely sunny afternoon. Hopefully it's nice and sunny where you are as well. We are going to be talking today about the DVSA's new digital app to electronically record driving tests. So I think, Graham, you're going to give us a bit of an overview of that. And I know the DVSA sent out a blog post a week or two ago. Probably some of you have already read that. Some of you may not have seen it yet. So in case you haven't, Graham is going to go through a lot of that with us today. So Graham is the Assistant Chief Driving Examiner from the DVSA. So knows his driving tests inside out. I think it's very, very fair to say. Excuse me. Just making sure, excuse me, sorry everybody, just making sure people know how the webinar will work. So we have some questions where you've already registered and some of you have put your questions forward to us in advance. So thank you very much for those. We have some of those. You can ask questions during the webinar as well. There is a question tab. It should be on your left-hand side. It says questions. So don't be offended if we don't get round to all of your questions. We'll do our best, but any that we can't answer during this session, or maybe some that maybe not quite as relevant, we can go back to those and come back to you afterwards. So we should be able to come to all of you at some point. Hopefully that's okay. So Graham, maybe over to you.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to DIA for inviting me along this afternoon to chat about, the changes that we're making to how we record the driving test digitally. So I'm sure I've met quite a few of you over the years at recent conferences regarding the changes to the driving test, but here we are not so long down the line looking at maybe taking the driving test a step forward as well. I mean, a lot of people would probably say that this piece of work is well overdue. I think we'll give you a bit of an overview of what's been happening and try to answer any of your questions, but also to put your minds at rest that, this really isn't a big change for you guys and your pupils, but obviously it does have touch points and we can discuss that. So yeah, I mean, we're not the first country in Europe to use a tablet to record the driving test. So we've worked closely with a lot of these countries to see how they do it. Are they using a front and back end system as well in terms of the booking? Lots of countries don't, so we think we're doing it properly. We have tried and looked into this in the past, but this really is a real concerted effort to make this, probably the best app out there. So what are we doing? Well, we're digitizing the examiner's journal, so their workload, their 7 tests currently, as you're probably aware, that comes through on a printer the day before, so the examiner can see, their journal for the next day. They arrive in the office that morning, and they've got the onerous task of writing out 7 test reports. So you can imagine that's prone to error. So we do around 1.8 million tests a year on cars. Now, those 1.8 million test reports going through the post, they go up to our offices in Newcastle, where they're manually put through a scanning machine where we capture all that management information. That's where it then talks to the other systems, such as DVLA, to issue the licenses. Now, out of that 1.8 million, there's a tremendous amount that needs manual intervention to correct mistakes, such as the pen coming out of the mark coming out of the box. So this piece of work really will make certain people's lives easier, namely, first of all, the examiner. They're not going to have to come into the office in the morning and write out 7 driving tests. Could that have a positive effect on you? I'd like to think so. Hopefully that would mean the examiner's in a slightly more cheerful mood. They've not sat there writing out 7 test reports. So they've been able to enjoy their cup of tea in the morning a little bit more, and maybe, use the tablet to browse the news or whatever. Sorry, Olivia.
No, I was just going to say any reason to reduce your paperwork, that's got to be a good thing.
Exactly, and as I touched on, it is very prone to error. You're writing out 7 reports, and not also that, you know, we've had issues with things getting lost in the post before, and you know, delays in candidates actually getting their license, which is the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're digitizing the journal, so that's going to, you know, remove that need to populate the test report. So that's all taken care of for the examiner. So what then else are we doing? So we're digitizing the whole process end to end. So this is the first point where it's going to touch on the candidate, is obviously in the waiting room, and the examiner comes into the waiting room with exactly the same declarations. They'll greet your pupils with, you know, can I see your driving license, and can you read and confirm the two declarations, which will still be the insurance and residency. Yes, they will be handed a stylus and an iPad, which will be embedded in a wallet, very similar to the wallet that the examiner uses now and hands you know, the pupil currently in the waiting room. So it'll be a very similar setup. The examiner will hand the wallet over to the candidate, ask them to tick the declarations and then sign in the box. Now, some people will obviously be concerned about the signature, thinking, well, we've all signed for parcels on the doorstep, and the signature looks really, really poor and nothing in any way that resembles our own. Now, we're using a stylus, and these styluses are pretty good, you know, that they're effective enough to get a likeness of that signature where it will satisfy what we need. The signature, yes, it's part of the, you know, identification process, but there's nothing that substitutes the photograph. So the photograph is obviously the key thing. Candidate will sign the declaration. There will then be another page, which currently obviously we don't have in the waiting room, which is, can you confirm that this is the correct email address? 98% of tests are booked via, you know, online and need an email address. That email address at the time of booking will be the email address that receives the summary. But the candidate does have the option at that point to change the email address. So the examiner will ask the candidate, are you happy for your test summary to go to this email? If they are, that's great. If not, they've got the opportunity at that stage to enter a different email address.
Yeah.
If it wasn't booked via, you know, online, then it can be sent via post. So we've done quite a bit of user research with candidates to try to understand what they want in terms of the touch points, which is obviously in the waiting room, but then probably most importantly at the end of the test, how do they receive that summary? What detail do they want in that summary? You know, you ask, and we did quite a lot of, we did some workshops here in Nottingham. We got around 20 people who have just passed the test. When we asked them to, you know, looking at the DL25 and how much of it do they understand? You know, when the first time I looked at a DL25, it's quite complicated, so it's quite difficult to look at that and interpret it in a way which allows you, you know, to form that remedial before you come back for another test, if that's the case. So we've worked very closely with candidates to get the detail on the information that goes out to them at the end. So we're not cluttering that, but we're getting what's absolutely key and vital for them. So at the end of the test, which is probably the only difference, again, because during the test itself, there will be no difference to how the test is conducted. Assessment isn't changing. If anything, it should make the test a little bit slicker, because if you imagine when you go outside to do the eyesight test, and then the, you know, the tell me, show me questions, if the tell me question is outside, the screen that the examiner will be on, it will prompt the examiner into doing these legal requirements, if you like. The examiner wouldn't be able to start the test until they'd carried out those set requirements, namely the eyesight requirement and the tell me question, entering the vehicle registration, and if you know, you've got your badge in the window, we can take the details of that as well. So it will be prompting the examiner along the journey, if you like, to do these things, which is a good thing. Examiners work at different test centres. They can be out of their normal routine when you go to a different test centre. So this kind of prompt will help them along the way.
So if I a question, if you don't mind, Graham.
Yeah.
So the app is it true that the app is going to look at things like if the vehicle itself, as well as the candidate, checking things like a valid MOT?
So it does have, well, the app itself doesn't have the search facility built in, although the search facility is available to examiners, which would check tax and MOT.
Right.
You know, anybody can download the app and use that facility. Sure. So it's not something that we're building in as standard.
No.
You know, there was, in terms of, if you think about the project is to digitize the journal and the test report. So
Yeah.
those kind of peripheral items, maybe further down the line that, you potentially there could be, a scanning of the registration and it tells you certain information, but that's not within scope of the
No.
project that we're looking at the moment, but potentially further down the line, Olivia.
Yeah, sure.
But not at this stage.
So,
Again,
oh, sorry, go on, carry on.
well, I was just going to say as well, there's lots of things, if you imagine, which would be nice to haves. And for example, I was mentioning the photograph a moment ago. If when you're trying to identify somebody, a little tiny photograph on a license isn't the easiest thing to do,
No.
especially when you've got a nice tablet in your hand and that technology. If we could get, a larger photograph of the candidate, then that would obviously be beneficial in the future. It would help, reduce fraud, all that kind of good stuff. So there's lots of scope that could come in to this further down the line, but at this stage it's just about delivering the minimal viable product, which is digitizing the journal and the test report.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess just to summarize a little bit more into before we take some wider questions, the candidate's email, which I guess is probably going to come up quite a bit in terms of when do they receive it, because I suppose that's the biggest change. And I'm hearing some things on the Dispatch blog around, there won't be a paper copy at the end of the test for the driving instructor and pupil to go through and work together with. But because we get 98% of tests booked online and it's going to be available to email, one of the things we've built in at the end of the test, when the examiner finishes the test, the examiner's got to go back in the office and complete the write-up. And occasionally, if ever we're running late or one thing or another, that write-up may get deferred until slightly later in the day.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't want that point to be when the result gets sent upstream, if you like, because we want to get the result to the candidate as soon as possible. So we've built in a stream where it will, once the examiner, if you like, is immediately back in the office, even though they've not completed all the necessary extra elements, it still will talk to GovNotify, which will trigger the email to the candidate. So the candidate, in an ideal situation, should receive that email, even before they get home from that lesson. So it could happen as quickly as within 5 minutes. So that email then can be shared between, the ADI, should the candidate choose to.
Okay, fantastic, great. Okay. I mean, we got a couple of questions. I don't know if it's right to start with a few more of those. So I don't know if
I know you had some questions as well, Olivia, didn't you, with that you sent across? I don't know if you want me to work through those, or if you want.
Yeah,
I mean, what
I'd do if I go through some of them you would have had in advance, but one of them is, can a copy of the DL25 be sent to the ADI trainer when a PDI presents a candidate for test? This will assist in finding areas that require attention in a training. So that was one question we had.
Okay, so I guess we're talking about a part 2 test there. So just to put a little bit of context into the rollout of this. Initially, this is going to be category B only. So we'll go live with category B. It'll not be a big bang like when we introduced the new test. We did the old test on the Friday and the new test on the Monday. So it's likely that you'll see over the coming months some examiners conducting tests digitally and some conducting them still on the traditional DL25. That will take a little bit of time as we roll that up and ramp it up until eventually everybody on category B car tests is conducting their tests digitally. We will then look to roll that out into vocational, so B+E, then across the entire vocational. Then we will look at bikes and then the ADI side. So it's still going to be a little bit of time before the part 2, and indeed, standards checks are conducted on a digital platform. That will still be done on a traditional platform. But when we do, whoever test it is, it will be there from a GDPR point of view. It'll be up to them who they want to share that with. And obviously you wouldn't have thought it would be an issue if you've been training somebody or teaching somebody to share that result, but it would be entirely up to them from a GDPR point of view if they wanted to share that information.
Sure. Okay. Another one is just asked, what date do you start using the iPad during practical tests? And I think you've been doing like a bit of a trial with people, haven't you, at the moment?
So we've not actually conducted any in anger in terms of live tests.
Yeah.
The app is virtually developed. It's going through, all the relevant checks that it needs to go through, IT health checks. We need to ensure, that it's been built in the correct way. We have to meet government digital standards as well. There's anything that's introduced in government in terms of digital has got to meet a 17 standards. So we need to go through that kind of level of assessment as well to make sure, it's accessible, all these kind of good stuff. But it's quite imminent. We're not saying it's going to be this particular day. We want to make sure everything's right, and we'll do it on a small scale. It'll be quite a small scale to start with, but certainly this calendar year we'll be doing digital tests, and hopefully in quite a large scale before the end of the year.
Brilliant. Got another one. Will the instructor be able to see the driver faults immediately after the test to discuss with the pupil or the client?
So yeah, I guess the answer would be no, because
It depends where it's been emailed to.
It depends where it's been emailed to. Yeah. So I suppose it depends how quickly. As long as it's been booked with an email, and like I mentioned, 98% are, then as long as there hasn't been an issue at our end, and we don't anticipate there being one, because our iPads are 4G enabled as well. So even if there's issues with connectivity from a Wi-Fi point of view, we've still got 4G. So that should trigger. It's got to speak to 3 avenues. Once we've finished the test, it speaks to 3 avenues. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if we wait until all of the write-up is completed, then there's a chance the candidate wouldn't receive that as soon as possible. So we've made a conscious decision to try to send it to Gov Notify as soon as the examiner gets back into the office.
Yeah.
So if that's the case and we've got 4G and Wi-Fi, which we have, then there's no reason why whoever's booked the test on that email, they shouldn't receive it within, 5 minutes. So yes, it's not immediate at the end of the test in terms of a paper copy of the DL25, but sometimes a little bit of time to reflect isn't a bad thing. So by the time the candidate's been dropped back off after the test, then there's no reason why it shouldn't be in the inbox.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. A lot of us know about examiners. Someone's asked a question about, make little notes on the paper strip at the top of the DL25, and things like pulling over and hill starts or whatever.
That's right.
So they said, how will that going to change with the new app?
That's interesting, and obviously the primary user on this project is the driving examiner. So they've been at the heart of this project, and we've worked very, very closely with them and iterated on their feedback. So one of the things that examiners do like to do, and it is a good observation, they do like to make little notes and diagrams at the top, but largely what they're doing on that notepad is marking off when they've done a normal stop or an angle start, so they remember what they've done. So what we've done on the app, we've built that in. So on the actual test report itself, the examiner will be able to tick those kind of things off. So when you see your pupils do, a normal stop, an angle start, the examiner might just tap the tablet to indicate that it's been done. So all that kind of things where they've made notes in the past has been built in, and it's really important that we've built the interface on the tablet as easy to use as possible.
Yes.
Because obviously, as a driving instructor well knows, it's the same as the examiner. You've got to obviously prioritise what the candidate's doing. So we can't be taking our eyes off the road for too long to mark things down. So it's a really intuitive interface where faults can be downloaded really quickly. I mean, arguably, I'd debate that it's quicker and easier to mark them on the tablet than what it is pen and paper on the DL25. So I think we've achieved our objective with that.
Right, good stuff. Okay, this is an interesting area, this next question, and it's something where there sometimes can be a little bit of a confusion over. Someone's asked, can an instructor use a similar DL25 app during lessons and within the law?
Yeah, and I think obviously you know as well as I do, Olivia, that it's with the regulation use 110, that because the driving instructor is the supervising role, then there's a slightly different take to what the examiner is, and it's the only time when a learner driver on test is can be unsupervised, if you like, in that, for the want of a better term. But so that's why it would be against the law for a driving instructor to be using a similar device.
Sure. Yeah.
Obviously, we've taken necessary mitigation as well in terms of the privacy screen on the iPad. So if the candidate was to look across, because one of the biggest issues is the distraction, not to mention the fact that the supervising role of the ADI. But in terms of actually using a tablet at the side of a driver, we've got the privacy screen on there. So if the candidate was to look across, there would be no distraction, and all they'd see is just a black screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so important, and that is a good question, because a lot of people, it can be a little bit, a lot of people are very clear on it, but there's some, they're thinking, oh, can I do this? And it's like, well, yes, you can use devices, but side of the road engine off. That's it's the same as an ADI in the passenger seat whilst on a lesson as it would be if you're behind the wheel, isn't it? So that's
yeah.
It.
No, it is, and I know there's a recent case that some people may be aware of where things may change in the future, but for right here, right now, we have to stick to what it says, and because it comes under that supervising role, it's exactly as you say, it's side of the road engine off. So yeah,
keys out of ignition if you don't have a keyless car yet. Yeah. Okay. Someone else is asking a question. Currently, feedback after a test is provided in two ways. There's a verbal debrief and a copy of the DL25 indicating faults. If the DL25 is completed electronically by the examiner, will the examiner still be in a position to offer both verbal and a copy of the DL25? I think the verbal side, isn't it? Because you've covered off they will get a copy. Yeah. Whoever's email address has been registered, they will get the copy very soon. But it's the verbalness afterwards, I think, that is the main question here.
Yeah, so obviously the verbal debrief is absolutely key to any test, and then that will still obviously be a part of it. And as always, we encourage people to come and listen to the debrief. If you can't accompany the test, which would obviously be the primary, chosen route to take, but if you can't accompany the test, then always be there and present for the debrief. And I did see some questions about some people who were unsure of how to approach the car at the end of the test, which is a bit of a shame. It should be, as long as you've established that in the waiting room, and even if you haven't, if your candidate wants you to come over to the test, just make yourself available, and the examiner should be more than welcome to open the door or wind the window down to let you listen into that debrief, which is absolutely key. Mm-hmm. But I think in this new space, I think it's actually even better, because currently at the end of the test you get one copy of the report. But within that team, there's arguably two of you. There's the instructor and the pupil. But now moving forward, it's so much easier to share that in a digital space. Whoever's email is actually on the booking, it would be so much easier to share that, because I know a lot of instructors like to keep the copy of the 25 because they can interpret it better than the candidate. But hopefully the summary, in terms of how we're setting it out in the letter, it will start with severity order. So if unfortunately the candidate has failed, it will have the order of dangerous, serious driving faults, and it will itemize it in that area. So it's much easier to navigate, if you like. If you're looking at a DL25 to try to work out where the faults are, it can be quite difficult to interpret if you're not familiar with that form. So hopefully this will be a much more clearer way of seeing the picture of the test.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm just looking at the chat box. A few of you asked about questions about the video. Is there going to be a video of this? And no, not at the moment. I don't believe that there wasn't anything available at the moment, was there, Graham, just to share with everybody?
No.
But what we're hoping to do at our conferences this year is to have something a little bit more to share with everybody. So that's the hope. So I can go through some questions, some information about those in a moment. But yeah, so at the moment you're very, sorry, I keep flashing up, next slide up. So at the moment you're just very much going through the, just explaining it, and we'll share more details as and when it's available.
Yeah, some people are probably aware of NASP, which obviously DIA are part of, and we're looking to give some demonstrations to NASP at the next meeting. So they're, to go through that kind of channel, and obviously we've been working with NASP from the outset, really, and keeping them informed of what this is about. But again, it kind of comes back to, that it's not a huge change certainly to the instructors and the pupils, and where the touch points are. We've been working closely, and we've done quite a lot of research with driving instructors as well. We've been to lots of test centres and asked for their opinion. Most people are just, this it makes sense. It actually will provide a better service to the candidate end to end.
Yeah. fantastic. Another question, it's not really about the app, but it's relevant to a driving test. I mean, somebody's asked, why is it at the moment that the candidate can say they don't want the instructor in part of the debrief? Isn't that counterproductive to helping to fix faults?
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
and it purely comes down to GDPR. So, you know, we asked that question, would you like the instructor to obviously accompany the test, and if the answer is no, would you like them to be there and listening to the debrief? And it's very, very rare, I must say, that the candidate says no. And usually if they do, it's maybe crossed wires. And I know when I conduct tests, I'll always ask again at the end of the test if the candidate has said no. Would you like your instructor to listen in? Because usually, you know, the candidate's confused at that time. They may be a little bit disorientated, and they might say no. But it ultimately does come down to GDPR, so it's one of those things.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, it is, as you say, it is a bit weird, isn't it? And because you think, you know, why wouldn't you? But yeah, it's the candidate's test, isn't it? So
yeah,
and
it is an interesting one. And going back to the, you know, the sharing of the information at the end, it was quite just to give a little bit of context. You know, when you book the driving test, and I appreciate a lot of driving instructors do book the test. And when they do book the test, they put their email in there. And I know there's been some questions around, can we not put more than one email in? And that's something that we are looking into. But, you know, as with all these things, you can be teaching somebody, then there might be, you know, there might be a difference of opinion, or there might be a clash of personalities, and that pupil might go to find a different instructor in the time that that person has already booked the test. So it's an interesting one. So that's why we've built in the facility in the waiting room to be able to, you know, change that email address at that particular point.
Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, if they come from another instructor or somebody else, then, you know, you need to have that kind of those fail safes there in that process, don't you? Okay, fantastic. Okay, does anybody have any further questions? I'll keep moving the question slide down, looking at your questions, and I keep accidentally knocking on putting up the next slide. So sorry if the image keeps changing. If anyone's got any other questions, then if you can pop them across now. If you think of questions, because it's always the same with these things, you think, oh God, we should have asked that question. Just drop us an email. You can send it to help@driving.org, and we'll take a look and you know, see if we can get you some answers for it. Okay. In terms of the next slide, so I just thought I would mention again, we have our not just one but 3 regional conferences this year in November. They're at the bottom of the dates. We have we're going to be in Bristol on the 11th of November. We're going to be in Nottingham on the 19th, and at Cardington, which is the DVSA's training facility near Bedford, on the 27th. So we are hoping that we're going to see lots of you there. We're going to have the key people from DVSA as key note speakers on the day, and providing us updates and give you a chance to ask your burning questions to the DVSA panel. We're also going to have workshops during the day, so we're going to have popular subjects that you've requested, like the grade A, national standards, and how those two, how standards check and the national standards, how they very much interlink and why the standards are so important. We're also going to be looking at subjects of pupil confidence, so that could be overconfidence, underconfidence, and that could be for a provisional license holder, or even if you're doing fleet or full license holders, things like that, because that's quite a popular subject. And also the whole safeguarding, and also lone working as well. Safeguarding, as we've highlighted last couple of years, such an important area that ADIs need to get involved with, need to get some training if you haven't already. It's also to be that extra set of eyes and ears on the ground for your pupils and looking after their, looking out for their welfare and making sure they're okay. But it's also learning how you can also safeguard yourself and what to do if you are, if there's an allegation against you. So that's also really important. And also, coming into that time of year, nights are going to get darker and starting to draw out already, starting to get dark about sort of 7:30, 7:45 now. And so as we're out in the car, we're working on our own, we're lone workers. So we're going to touch on that subject a bit as well. So at the moment, yes, book before the end of this month. So you've got another couple of weeks. There is a £20 off per ticket. So we really hope to see you there, and you can book online at driving.org. The website's at the bottom there, or you can just give us a bell on our number, and we'll be more than happy to have a chat with you, answer any questions, and hopefully get you booked on as well. So let me just double check the question box one more time, just make sure anybody's there.
I think there was a couple of questions, Olivia, regarding, I think there was one regarding, we're going to time the test. So the simple answer to that would be no.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't time the test, although there may be a timer built in for the examiners just to keep an eye on it, just as a friend.
Yeah.
But in terms of timing the test, the answer to that would be no. Maybe people might be interested, because this is technology, and occasionally, as we all know, technology could fail. So what would the backup be? Well, the backup wouldn't be the DL25 as we know it, because, obviously that would go through a scanning machine, and that's not, a viable way of keeping that. So what we want to do is to just have a paper backup, which resembles the test app, and then the examiner, should there be any issues with the tablet, can conduct the test on paper, and then they would manually rekey that information into the tablet once they're back in the office. So that would be the contingency. That's all been built in. If the app, I'd like to think it wouldn't happen, but if it was to fail during the test, obviously the last thing we want to do would have a detrimental effect on the test. So we'd continue on paper, and the examiner would control it in that sense. But we've built in, the facility, if the app does crash, then it will load back to the last stage where it crashed. So all those kind of contingency things have been built in. So that's one of the reasons as well that we'd like to start on a small scale, to just make sure all these things are working as we want them to. So
brilliant, thank you for that one. Someone's asked, will the examiner give the test result verbally at the end? I imagine they would do.
Yep, exactly the same. So yep, that wouldn't change. The examiner, and the good thing about that is, it's and I've worked as a staff instructor with our new examiners in the past, and as examiners get more experience, they get a little bit quicker at the end of the test at calculating that, but some may be slower than others. So you can imagine, you pull up, that's the end of the test, switch an engine off, give me a moment to complete the paperwork. All the candidate wants to know is, have I passed or failed? But the examiner's there, they're totting it up, they check, the double check, then they turn to the candidate and give the news. Whereas this is instantaneous. As soon as the examiner pulls up, thank you, switch your engine off, just give me a moment, they just click end test. And as long as it, as long as there's no surprises there, the result is given. As long as, and again, the examiner it should be better for the debrief as well, because an examiner should debrief certainly a fail in severity order. So if there was dangerous faults, they should start with them and work their way through the dangerous faults into the serious faults. So that will be presented to the examiner in that format. So severity order, any dangerous, serious driving faults. So they will be able to debrief the most severe items first, and it'll be instantaneous. So again, another little, a small thing, but in my mind, it's something that just speeds up that element where the candidate is very anxious and wants to know the outcome of the test.
Yes, cool, brilliant. Is there going to be a pass certificate issued at the end, as there is now?
There is, unfortunately. I say unfortunately. I mean, it's in legislation, isn't it, that we need to to give the pass certificate. I think government are a little bit busy right now with certain things to look at legislative changes on pass certificates. So yes, there will be, but then again, I'm talk to candidates, and some candidates, they really like the pass certificate. It's nice to get something, and get the photograph. But I'm sure in the future, and I'm not sure when it'll be, but in the future, that will eventually, inevitably move across to a digital platform. But yes, it will still be a paper pass certificate.
This might be a question that you don't know the answer to yet, but once it all rolls out over to the new app, and if you're going to have a stock of DL25, someone's asked if they can use them. Good question.
I'm sure there will be some DL25s knocking about, and if you speak nicely to your local test centre manager, I'm sure they could spare you a few.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Right, okay. So I think that's about it for the questions at the moment. So I would just like to say to you, Graham, thank you so much for your time today and all the information that you've given us. It's been so useful. Hopefully everybody else has found it useful as well. As I say, if you want any further questions answering, just drop us an email to help@driving.org or give us a quick call, and we'll do what we can to get them answered. I think, Graham, you've kindly said if there's anything we can't answer, I think you're able maybe to, if there's anything a little bit more obscure, maybe you could take a quick look for us. That'd be very kind.
Yeah, that's fine.
Fantastic. Try not to bombard you. Okay, right. Well, I think that's about it then, ladies and gents, for this session. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Livia. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.